What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. So, look, man, some of the arguments that LeBron fans, or even maybe not even just LeBron fans, just haters of the 90s, haters of our generation of basketball, some of the arguments they're making now, because we're getting farther and farther removed, from the 90s, and because the media networks like ESPN and to a slightly lesser extent FS1, they don't feel a need to really talk about the history of the game anymore, just to prop up one or two players. A lot of these guys are saying things now that absolutely just make you just want to turn off your computer, turn off your phone, and just step away from social media for forever. Now you have some LeBron fans who are saying that the 90s didn't have any rivalries. Yes, they're saying that the 90s didn't have any rivalries, which is so one of the original complaints that we had 10 years ago, even more than 10 years ago, was that outside of the Cleveland Cavaliers Warriors rivalry, there weren't any real rivalries left. We were complaining about how these guys were teaming up with each other and, all buddy, and there was no real rivalries. Now you're saying, now you have the gall to try to say the 90s didn't have rivalries? The NBA, are you serious? Well, first of all, I think the main rivalry, even though it's perhaps not even the biggest rivalry or the best rivalry, the most intense rivalry overall, but the main one we tend to think of, the marquee rivalry, was Bulls versus Knicks, right? Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls versus Patrick Ewing and the New York Knicks. All right? And they faced each other in the playoffs 5 different times during that decade: 1991, 92, 93, 94, and 96. Now, of course, in 94, Jordan wasn't on the team, and that's the one year that they actually beat Chicago. But in 92, 93, and 94, the rivalry was very competitive. And at one point in time, the Knicks had an advantage. The Knicks had I don't know if they had an advantage, but in 92, the 51-win Knicks went 7 games with the number 1 seeded Chicago Bulls, and in 93, they had a 2-0 lead against the defending NBA champions before the Bulls won 4 in a row. So we all know how intense that rivalry was, and it took Michael Jordan oftentimes going off for 40, 45, 50 points or more for them to vanquish the New York Knicks. It was intense. It was physical. It was personal. Another rivalry, Bulls and Cavs. All right. Now that rivalry, of course, started in the late 80s, and it looked like to many that the advantage was going to be with the Cavaliers. Some people said the Cavs were going to be a team of the 90s. Michael Jordan had something to say about that. But the rivalry with the shot, obviously, but the rivalry spilled into the 90s. They faced each other in the playoffs in the 90s, 92, 93, and 94. Now the rivalry kind of ended as Brad Daugherty began to break down due to back problems, and Mark Price had injury issues, and that team sort of collapsed. But that was a rivalry definitely in the early 90s. Then, of course, you have the Bulls Pistons, which started in the 80s but spilled over into the 90s. We don't have to really go into that rivalry too much. They played each other in the 91 conference. They played each other in the 1990 and 91 conference finals. The Bulls losing in 7 and 90, and the Bulls sweeping the Pistons in 91. Okay? Heat Magic. Now, they only played each other one time in the 90s. That was 1997. But ever since those teams were implemented in Florida, there was a rivalry, a silent one, but a definite rivalry of sorts to see which one of these teams would be the dominant team in Florida. And initially, Miami was the first team to make the playoffs of the two in 92. They lost in the first round to the Chicago Bulls. But then when the Orlando Magic drafted Shaq in 92 and got Penny Hardaway in 93, Orlando became the dominant team in Florida. But then when Shaq left in 96 and Penny Hardaway was left, they had an intense playoff series in the first round between Penny Hardaway and Magic and the Miami Heat. That series went 5 games. Back then, the first round was best of 5. Penny absolutely smoked them, if I remember correctly, in games 3, 4, and 5. He averaged 31 points a game in that series. It was the playoff leader in scoring until Jordan surpassed him in the finals on average, scoring average. But after that series, but Penny Hardaway was starting to succumb to injuries, the Heat became the dominant team in Florida, obviously winning a championship in 2006, and of course winning back-to-back titles with the Heatles. Back-to-back titles with the Heatles in the 2000 teams. Then, of course, you want to talk about another rival, the Heat and the Knicks. Now, that was the absolute apex when it comes to defensive basketball. The basketball that a lot of these guys would say was horrible to watch. I loved it. Final score 73-70. Intense rivalry between the Heat and the Knicks. They played each other in the playoffs 97, 98, 99, into the 2000s. And generally speaking, earlier on, I think the Knicks had an advantage. The Knicks should have won in 97, but of course, that was the year there was that brawl and game. The Knicks had a 3-1 lead. There was a brawl, I think, in game 5, it might have been. The Knicks were, I think, winning that game. Miami wound up winning that game. And then the suspensions in game 6 or 7 hurt the Knicks more than the Heat. And ultimately, they blew that 3-1 lead. And Miami, Miami and the New York Knicks went back and forth for quite some time. Another rivalry to talk about. Knicks and Pacers. Madison Avenue versus, the country bumpkins, so to speak, right? But it was deeper than that. Many people look at Indiana, they think of the right way to play basketball, the team-oriented way to play basketball. The New York Knicks, these was a bunch of bullies. And from a mental standpoint, the Knicks felt like the Pacers should be pipsqueaks. But ultimately, this became perhaps the most engaging rivalry of the 90s. They played each other in the playoffs 93, 94, 95, 98, and 99. And with each series, the Pacers generally grew stronger and more respected because, they're from Indiana. Yeah, they're not a glitzy team, but they were tough as nails. And that was a great series. Another rivalry, Lakers and Jazz. They played each other in the playoffs. On paper, the Lakers were the more talented team, but Shaq, as we all know, had problems guarding the pick and roll. When you think of pick and roll, you think of Stockton and Malone, and they used to kick the Lakers' ass. I think 97, if I'm not mistaken, I think they won 4-1. In that series in 97, 98, they swept them. And the Lakers were so spooked of the Jazz that for the next couple of years, especially when Phil Jackson became the head coach, they did everything they could to try to avoid playing the Utah Jazz in the playoffs. Another rivalry, Jazz Rockets. They played each other in playoffs 94, 95, 97, and 98. Akeem the Dream versus Stockton Malone. And in 94 and 95, the Rockets got the best of them. In 97 and 98, the Jazz got the best of them. One other rivalry of note that gets forgotten over time, the Spurs versus the Suns. They played each other in the playoffs in 92, 93, 96, 98, and then a different generation of players into the 2000s. One of those series, of course, was infamously considered rigged. I think it was 2005. That was a great series. Initially versus versus the Admiral David Robinson, and after the first year, Charles Barkley and those guys, and later on, you had that team with Rex Chapman and who was on that team? Rex Chapman and trying to remember those damn guards. Rex Chapman, Jason Kidd. Man, I forgot that team now, man. I forgot that Suns team now, but they were feisty. On paper, the Spurs were better, but, they made a go of it. And, look, that's just some of the notable rivalries. There were others as well. So, no, to sit up there and say that the 90s didn't have rivalries, you don't know what you're talking about. At that point, you really don't know the history of basketball, and you can't be taken seriously. But anyway, that's all I got to say about it. What you guys think?